we kind
Yeah.
of come from different generations, but it's nice because we have different perspectives, but they kind of mesh that in a way that people
Yeah.
enjoy.
Well, Bear, I'm 75, almost 76 here in another month.
I'm a youngster at 70.
Okay.
So we are live. Hey, everybody in D Live World, welcome. If you have any questions for Tom, please put them in all caps. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to hit record and start this bad boy up. We're also on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. So this is fun. This is why I love technology. It allows us to really to reach a lot of people all at once for this information. So it's really cool.
I love the scenery behind you. Where is that?
That's right out my the back door.
Beautiful.
Now
So where are you?
You're looking at a picture. It's a picture of what's out at my back door, so it's a digital background, but that's, I live in the very tail of the Appalachian Mountains as they come down through Georgia and into Alabama, North Alabama. And I'm in that tail end of that mountain range there. It's in Huntsville, Alabama, and the actual mountain I'm on is called Green Mountain. But about every 4 or 5 miles, the mountain changes its name.
That's very East
gorgeous.
Coast.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna start the recording and jump into this. Really exciting. Here we go. And boom, we are back for another episode of AlphaCasts. My name's Mike Winter. I'm here as always with Dr. Bear Paul Lando up here on the beautiful Smith River in the great state of Jefferson, enjoying our fall into winter as harvest is over. And we are focusing now on building out new content for you guys. We will have a lot more content for the co-op. If you are interested in supporting Alfa Vedic, we highly recommend joining the co-op at patreon.com/Alfa Vedic. You can also join us on Telegram at t.me/Alfa Vedic or Discord at alphavedic.com/Discord. We are all about building community and collaborating and cooperating in a new decentralized system so we can bring the change we all want to see. How about that? So today we have someone I've been really looking forward to talking to. Tom Campbell is the author of the My Big Toe trilogy that unifies science and philosophy, physics and metaphysics, mind and matter, purpose and meaning, the normal and the paranormal. The attributes assigned by some theologians to their concept of God are very similar to the attributes of the LCS, the larger consciousness system, as scientifically derived by Tom. The next big cultural and scientific paradigm shift is virtual reality, as Tom has said for over a decade. Virtual reality is now a more widely accepted concept in science and technology. Tom combines a fundamental understanding of consciousness and virtual reality to back up this prediction with a logically and scientifically derived My Big Toe theory. The theory explains most of the remaining big questions in both physics and metaphysics. Tom's model of consciousness derives quantum mechanics and relativity, eliminates quantum weirdness, and builds a scientific foundation under much of what was previously deemed quote-unquote paranormal. This comprehensive logical and scientific explanation of both objective and subjective reality perfectly defines a big toe, or theory of everything. A former NASA physicist, Tom worked as a large complex systems analyst by day and collected evidential information in the larger consciousness system by night. Tom delivers information through his unique abilities and experiences that you will not find anywhere else. And going into other realms is something that has always fascinated me, something I've always said, if people want to know what the reality is all about, go do the work yourself. Figure out how to get out of body. It's a real thing. I've had experiences doing it myself, and it is what true science is all about. How you doing today, Dr. Bear Paul Lando?
Doing great. Thank you, Michael. And Thomas, so great for you to make time for us today. And it's really an honor to have you here. So thank you. I really enjoy hearing about your journey. And, I've listened to some of your podcasts and I feel, even though we don't know each other, we're kind of kindred spirits in a certain way. I did my own journey through medicine, and after my conventional training, I felt like I had some good foundation, but there's just a lot of missing parts. And especially when I got out in practice, things didn't really work the way I wanted to, things to work, with clients. And it led me to explore different avenues, what some people call alternative. And I started with Chinese medicine and homeopathy. And what I found is, parallel course with my metaphysical studies is that these people thousands of years ago were not only just talking about things, but had a practical application and way to measure things, real practical systems. And so that was my segue, I guess, into a whole different world. These days, we have a community, worldwide community, where we measure with instrumentation and so forth, what we'll call the qualitative side of science. And, when I listen to you, and I know we're going to learn more from you directly today, I like to term science as more of an integrative science. I believe that's the way it needs to go. We apply these principles to soil science here. We have a, off-grid permaculture farm. We're still doing a lot of research in medicine. So it's marvelous to just hear about your journey and with your background and credentials. And you've really covered both sides of the equation yourself. So we can start it off wherever you like there. And but just glad to have you here. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. I appreciate the opportunity of coming here and chatting with you. That's, information is good, but shared information is even better. So an opportunity to share some information, I'm thankful for that. So thanks for inviting me. You mentioned that if you go back, 2,000 years to 3,000 years, you find that people seem to have a pretty good understanding of the nature of reality and how the world worked. And that's because, though it's very, very expensive and difficult to explore outer space, exploring inner space just takes time. And, if you're a human being and you've got some time, you can explore inner space. And when you explore that inner space, you'll find answers. You'll find, information that helps you, deal with life, deal with reality. You understand the why and the how of reality a lot better. So people have had the time to do this, for a long, long time. I guess the image for me comes up of Buddha sitting under the tree, contemplating the nature of reality. And suddenly an aha moment came and he had it. Well, he had the time to sit under a tree and contemplate, and so have others. So the kind of the wisdom that we here in the 21st century are beginning to dig up has been around for a long, long, long time. We are just kind of restating it in our own language, in terms that and metaphors that mean things to us. That we have to, every I shouldn't say generation, but every once in a while you have to restate in terms of the metaphors and the vocabulary and the knowledge of the people of your time. Otherwise, the old poetry gets hard to understand. So you can read the Bhagavad Gita, and if you happen to be a left brain science guy, you get through about 5-10 pages and say, what? This is about some guy in a chariot in a war? What's that all about? Doesn't make any sense, So you quit reading it because you don't understand, you don't have enough knowledge for it to make sense to you. So that's why we have to reinterpret, because we have to bring everybody else along with it. So, I'm a guy that's had one foot in physics and one foot in consciousness research for, 40 years probably with the physics as a professional physicist. And now I'm retired, but, all that same amount of time. I started my consciousness research career and my physics career all at about the same time, within probably 3 or 4 months of each other. So, it's been a long, strange, wonderful journey. And now I have an opportunity to share some of the insights and some of the knowledge gained during that journey. And I'm just having a really good time with it. It's just a lot of fun. So,
it is fun. And I think, the valuable role that you play for all of us is, let's just say lending subtitles to old metaphysical studies so that it is accessible to the Western mind. And just like the Eastern hemisphere of the earth at one time was more the keepers of the old ancient knowledge, and the Western world were more just the manifestation on a physical plane. And we're seeing the two hemispheres come together now for integration. And just like on an individual level, a lot of us are getting the message that it's time to integrate the two hemispheres and work with a whole brain rather than just one half. So, Michael, I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry about that.
Oh no, that you just hit the nail on the head right there. What I was kind of going towards, which was I feel like we're in a space right now going into 2021 where we can kind of, as you were saying, integrate the West and the East in a way that I feel like could be more powerful than the last, few thousand years because of our connectivity on a global scale. What we're doing right now. I mean, we're projecting out these thoughts to thousands of people all over the globe via this technology. So it's really empowering and it's exciting times. And I hope people are excited about this time. And one thing I've noticed in being involved in the consciousness music festival scene over the last 10 years, which really erupted in California with a lot of these really cool festivals where kids aren't going just to rage and do drugs. They're going to do yoga and meditate and connect and really mess around and play with their consciousness, which is really exciting. So I just wanted to ask Tom, do you feel like we're moving into an era of new consciousness exploration? And are you yourself still pushing those boundaries of your own exploration into your consciousness?
yes and yes. Those are the short answers, but I can elaborate a little bit.
Please do.
We, humanity, we human beings, we've been around as Homo sapiens for about 200,000 years. And in that time, the purpose that we've had here all this time is to evolve the quality of our consciousness. And that means become love, cooperate, care, make it about other, not just about self. This is our goal. This is our purpose. And we've been working on that consciousness evolution, becoming love, for 200,000 years as a species. And we haven't made a whole lot of progress. We've made some progress. If you look, the world is a much kinder, gentler, nicer place now than it was, say, 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. In general, if you look at most people, most of the time, life is a lot better. We've made progress. But one of the interesting things is about evolution is that, the more you change or the more you evolve, the easier it is to evolve more. As you evolve, your system becomes more capable, more flexible, more complex. And as it does that, its ability to grow then also, the potential for that growth becomes greater and greater. So what we have is evolution is very, very slow at the beginning, evolution of consciousness, this growing up thing. But as you make progress faster. And then it goes faster and faster. So the process accelerates. So it looks something like this. You start off with a curve that's very, like my finger here, very slow, goes up a little, up, and goes. That's the way it works. Okay. And we are just now at that part that's starting to go up. And for the first time in the history of humanity, we have the potential to take some big steps forward in consciousness quality, in caring, in cooperation, in working together, in things that matter, like relationship, other people, connections. We can take some big steps here. And I would agree with Mike that the core, let's say, thing that is making this possible now that wasn't before is technology. As Mike says, the technology we have today is the key ingredient that wasn't there before. And what that technology does is, instead of, there's always been people, as we said, that have had time to figure out the nature of reality, and they've created little bubbles. You can call those little bubbles of enlightenment. And they've popped up all through the ages. Every age has had its people that have understood and have little bubbles of enlightenment. That's sort of what you guys are doing out in the woods. You're trying to create a little bubble of enlightenment out there, that, finds better ways of doing things and better ways of thinking. So we got these little bubbles of enlightenment all over the place, and always have for thousands of years, but they stay localized. They don't expand. I mean, they expand a bit right around the local area. Buddha had a whole bunch of people came around him and they learned and so on. And now Buddhism is a big thing with millions of people, but it's still in the margins. It's not mainstream. Okay, well, today, what is mainstream has a lot to do with science. I call the scientists the high priests of Western culture. And the reason I call them that is the job of the high priest is to tell everybody else what to believe, what's true and what's not. That's what the high priests do. Well, 500, 600 years ago, 1,000 years ago, those high priests were all religious high priests, and they told the people what to believe. Well, we've passed that point now. It's the scientists are now the high priest. They tell people what to believe. They're the ones that define mainstream. So before, mainstream was defined by religion, but there was all sorts of competing religions. So there was a lot of confusion as to, well, yeah, that's what they believe and that's what they believe, but how do you know? Well, science kind of fixes that. There's just science. There's not like this shade of science and that shade of science and, all these other kinds of sciences, and you really don't know which one's really science. There is just science. And science is supposed to work on facts. It's supposed to work on experiments. And the people believe what the scientists say. So science now defines mainstream. And because we have technology, the world, information-wise, is a much smaller place than it used to be. It's still physically the same size, but as far as information goes, it's not much bigger than a medium-sized community. People everywhere on this globe see what's happening, share ideas, deal with concepts, and they do it within days, even within minutes and hours. It's like we're doing right now. We're sharing this all over the place. And it's going to go out and be on YouTube, and it'll sit on YouTube, and 10 years later, there'll be, 300,000 views from all over the planet. So that's different. Now, I think the key thing here is that physics is going to be the thing that kicks this change. I say we have this chance to make some big progress, and physics is going to be the thing that kicks that off. And they've been kind of stuttering around with it for about 100 years. About 100 years ago, we had the inception of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, with the double slit experiment. And at that point, science knew that materialism wasn't the right answer, because double slit just tells you that it doesn't follow a material, logic. It goes beyond a materialist logic. But science has been very uncomfortable with that. They don't like that. They're still stuck back in Newton's day with the great clockwork universe. That's where science is. They've never really moved on, because though they were excited back in the 1920s about this new idea and something other than materialism, they didn't know what to do with it. They couldn't take the next step. They didn't have any logic to derive it. It was just the result of the experiment. Okay, now, so what's the theory? Why is it like that? What's the overall picture? Well, they didn't have an overall picture. The only picture they had was the one Newton handed them. Plus, they were able to do calculations in quantum physics and get right answers, but they didn't understand it. So they called it weird science. They didn't call it science that's logical. All the rest of science is logical, but quantum physics is weird science. It's weird because it doesn't follow materialism. So instead of continuing to search for that understanding, instead they took the easy road out, which was, oh, it's just weird science. It's always going to be weird science. It's something we'll never know. It's just one of those things nature never intended for people to find out. We just have to deal with it as weird science. There is no answer. We just accept it as weird science and stop looking for, a theory behind it. So they did. So after 20 or 30 years of banging their heads against that wall, they finally gave up and said, it's just weird science. Nobody will ever know. Let's go on. And they kind of stopped looking for an answer. Well, now the quantum mechanics has grown and grown, and they've, instead of doing just a double slit, now there's 100 experiments that all say the same thing. It's not materialistic, it's information. Information is what's important. That's what reality is built out of. It's built out of information. Double slit told them that when they realized that what the experimenter knew changed the results of the experiment. You see, the person looks at the which way data, which is, which slit the particle goes through, and you get one answer. They don't look at it, you get a different answer. So why does what the experimenter know change the nature of reality? You see, that was what double slit brought. Well, now they've done similar experiments that aren't just double slit, but a whole bunch of experiments, and they all say the same thing, and that is, this reality is information-based. Matter of fact, I was listening to a video of some guys over that were looking at the big atom smasher over in CERN. Remember back, about 6 or 7 years ago when the God particle, the Higgs boson was a big deal.
The hydrogen collider.
Yeah. So they were over there and they were being interviewed. And I was listening to this interview, and this part of it just jumped out at me because it's so obviously true. And that the scientists there were saying, look, we don't really think of the electron anymore as a piece of mass with a charge. That's the way we used to think of it, but that doesn't work. We can't use that information and compute right answers. We think of an electron as a point with the attributes of mass and the attributes of charge. Well, you see, attributes are just information. So they think of the electron as information. And with that, they can compute the right answers with their quantum physics to predict what the results of those atoms smashing together are going to produce. So what we've had now is that physicists, probably a pretty large minority of physicists, say that our reality is information-based because physics has just been telling them now for about 100 years that's the way it is. Well, they don't really know what to do with that. See, they're right back where they were back in the 1920s after Einstein and Bohr and Heisenberg and Wigner and all those guys came up with the double slit experiment. They know that it's information-based, but they don't know what to do about that. Okay, so it's information-based. Now what? Where does that take us? What's the theory? So it's the same sort of place. But now, you see, we have a concept that we didn't have back in the 20s. That concept's called virtual reality. It didn't exist back there. We know now about realities that are information-based. And we realize that when you say it's information-based, that is logically equivalent to say it can be computed. And saying that it can be computed is logically, connected to, or is a logical equivalent to, a computer can produce it. Well, that's a simulation. And simulations are virtual realities. That's the way it is. Well, if this is information-based and our reality is computed, then we live in a virtual reality. And though now a lot of physicists, a lot of young physicists, the old physicists are still stuck back in Newton's day, but a lot of the younger physicists realize that that's just a fact here. I mean, their physics tells them that. We live in this virtual reality, but they don't know what to make of it. So look at virtual reality and it'll tell you what to make of it. How does virtual reality work? All virtual realities have a few things in common. One thing is they have to be computed. So you need a computer. And that computer has to be non-physical from the viewpoint inside the virtual reality. So if you're the elf in a virtual reality, then that computer can't be in elfland. It has to be non-physical to the elf outside of the virtual reality, right? Because the virtual reality doesn't compute itself. It has to be computed somewhere else outside the reality. Okay, so that's one point. The other point is that all virtual realities have to have players. There has to be a reason for a virtual reality. They just don't spontaneously, virtual realities don't just erupt, you know. They need a purpose, and their purpose is that they have players that play the avatars that are in the virtual reality. By definition, virtual realities make avatars. Okay. Now the player and the computer have to communicate with each other. They have to be in the same reality frame. And they both have to be non-physical to the viewpoint from inside the virtual reality. So where does that leave us? Now we apply that to us. What do you have? You have us. Our bodies aren't really us. Our bodies are just the avatar, a computation. We are consciousness, the choice maker. That's what the player does. The player makes choices for its avatar. So the computer computes, and this computer has to be in the same reality as the player. The player is consciousness making our choices. That computer is also consciousness. It's in that same reality frame. So I posit a larger consciousness system, which is all of consciousness. It's an information system. Well, that makes sense because what are you conscious of? You're conscious only of information, right? Your sense data. That's what you're conscious of. So consciousness is information. And we have this big information system, and part of it configures itself as a computer, and part of it takes chips of itself or pieces of itself, subsets of itself, and calls those individuated units of consciousness. That's the player. That's you and Mike and me and all the rest of the people and dogs and cats and horses and everything else out there that's conscious. That's what we are. We're individuated units of consciousness. So we're part of the whole. There is just this one thing, and we're part of it. Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say you're kind of getting to the grand concept of most mysticism, which is this idea of whatever you want to call it, the ether, the source, the the mana, this idea that there's this overriding essence of reality that everything springs from, right? And
exactly,
some will call that God, some will call that source, which is a popular way to mention it these days. And my question is, well, and one thing with quantum physics, we see that space doesn't matter, right? That you can instantly have something, you know, where you have two of the same particles at the same time in totally different places. So my question is, how can we, I think everyone in Alfa Vedic land gets this and understands this, which is really cool. That's why we love our community. Tom, how can we start applying this knowledge in more practical sense to apply the change we want to see right now in the world? Okay. And sorry to propel the conversation to this level, but it's like, I feel like we're in a place now where we can start going there, you know?
We can. So anyway, yeah, I was going there. I'm just slow. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm making a slow pass, but people have to understand kind of the nature of reality so it makes sense. So, all right, yes, you're right. So now we have consciousness is the one thing that is real. Everything else is virtual. We're a piece of consciousness. You know, consciousness doesn't die. Consciousness is immortal. Avatars die, and so on. We can go through all of that. And we have purpose that I mentioned. Purpose is to evolve the quality of consciousness. And that's done because consciousness is an information system. That evolution is done by lowering the entropy of consciousness. That is, taking random bits and turning them into something that is meaningful, significant. Entropy is a measure of disorder. So you have all random bits in the system. It evolves by making order out of those random bits, calls that information, and then evolves from there. All right, so all this ties together. Now here we are in the 21st century. We have an internet. We have, now we can, everybody's netted together. Big ideas can fly and reach huge audiences very quickly. How do we get in the mainstream? Science now defines the mainstream. Okay, science is coming to the conclusion that this is a virtual reality. They don't take the next step, but the next logical step is then that this is a computed virtual reality. Consciousness is the computer, okay? And we bodies are the avatar. Now, when we do this, when the physicists say, yea, verily, this reality is a virtual reality, when they say that, they won't want to go any further than that. But the rest of the world isn't going to let them stop there. The rest of the world is going to say, okay, it's a virtual reality. You're the scientist. You know that's a fact now. That's not a theory. That's a fact because science says that's the way it is. So where's the computer? Who's the programmer? You see, the rest of the world is going to ask these big questions, and physicists are going to say, well, we don't know. We don't want to go there. We just say it's a virtual reality, but everybody else will want to go there. And at that point, we're in mainstream now with these ideas that have always been in little, bubbles of enlightenment elsewhere. Mainstream. Physicists have told us that there is something non-physical to us that is our source, because that's the statement, that's the logical, that's the logical conclusion of this is a virtual reality. The logical conclusion is there's something non-physical to us that is our source. And at this point, people are going to start to wonder, well, if that's a fact, it's not that this is somebody's theory or somebody's religion. This is science telling us this is the way it is. So where is that computer? And if we are not ready for this moment, we're going to end up with a lot of people trying to fill that power vacuum now that suddenly got opened with, oh, my God's a better programmer than your God, this sort of nonsense. We're going to get that kind of struggle. But if we are to the point of understanding, then we'll get that. And we'll say, yes, there is something bigger. There is a spiritual component to us. There is something that is more fundamental than this physical world. And then all sorts of possibilities come around. Now, once you understand that consciousness is the computer and that we are pieces of consciousness, the player, which again is just logical consequence of this being a virtual reality, you also then must come to the conclusion that love is the answer. Now, that'll seem immediately that that's a big step, but I can make that a shorter step. See, love is the answer. What's our purpose? Why are we here? What's the point? And that's to evolve the quality of our consciousness. You see, consciousness is an information system. An information system evolves by lowering its entropy, okay? Now, we are a social system. All these individual units of consciousness make a social system. How does a social system lower its entropy? It does that through cooperation and caring and making it about other. That's how social systems lower their entropy. So why are we here? Well, consciousness just is a thing that communicates. It talks, it makes choices, right? So it communicates with each other. That's what it is. And it's supposed to lower its entropy. And it got to the point where it wasn't growing very quickly, so it created a lot of individuated units of consciousness, which gave it more potential room to grow into. Wow, look, what could you do with all these free will consciousness interacting with each other? Well, it was supposed, what can you do? That's a social system. Okay, what you can do is cooperate and care. But just a bunch of conscience in a big chat room talking to each other doesn't have much choices at any consequence. So evolution is slow. So the larger system source says, well, I'll take a part of my system, be a computer. I'll make a virtual reality with a really tight rule set that defines every interaction. Every time energy changes someplace, I'm going to define it with my rule set. Now you have a place where there are consequences. You see, the rules create consequences. So you create a virtual reality, get your individuated units of consciousness to go make choices for avatars, and suddenly it's not just chit-chat in a room, it's life and death choices. It's stay alive choices, survival choices, caring choices, help or hurt. You know, what can I take? What can I give? You got all of these choices. And now you have a virtual reality, which I call an entropy reduction trainer. And consciousness is playing in this entropy reduction trainer in order to evolve the quality of its consciousness, because with consciousness, it's either evolve or die. If you increase your entropy, more chaos, right? You get to the point that all your bits are random. No information, information system's dead. Or you can lower your entropy and create more and more meaningful information, configure what you have, the resources you have in more meaningful ways. And now there's more information and more potential and more ways that you can evolve. So the system needs to evolve its consciousness. It needs to lower its entropy. And I just make a string of synonyms out of lowering your entropy, raising the quality of your consciousness, and becoming love. All of those mean the same thing. So now that gives us a nice picture of where we are. So what does this have to do with technology? Well, if enough people understand this idea, which is totally inclusive, it excludes no one. All people with all ideas, can fit into this group, can find themselves in this kind of a model. If you're an atheist, you can say, aha, yeah, I knew it. There is no God. There's just this larger conscious system. That's the source. Okay. And if you're a theist, you can say, I knew it all along. We have this aware consciousness. That's the source. So everybody can kind of find the system. It doesn't matter whether you are a Sufi or a Buddhist or, Gnostic, whatever, or many of the indigenous people, with those old cultures that have these old ideas, like Australia Bushmen, they live in the dream. And when you die, then you get to the real world, and this world's a dream world. Buddha said this world was an illusion, so all of that gets collected, and yes, they all can find themselves in this one understanding that's very inclusive of everybody. So if we have this sort of thing and this understanding, there are no beliefs required. Matter of fact, belief is the enemy. Believing anything is a risk. Always stay skeptical of everything. This is science. This is a logical progression. Now, it doesn't sound like science when I talk about it in an hour or 2 hours. It's just not I can't do derivations here. But it really is a logically based thing. It starts from the beginning, and just deductive logic, comes out with this as the model. This is a logical model.
Well, the ironic thing too, Tom, is that current Western, basically science right now is a belief system.
It is a belief system. It believes in materialism. And, that is, they've painted themselves into this corner. And the corner doesn't have the answer. The answer isn't in that space. If you are a materialist, you also have to be a determinist. This is a big machine. Reality is a big machine, and all machines are deterministic. So the big clockwork universe is a materialist universe. If you are a determinist and a materialist, you have to state that time doesn't exist. Time is an illusion. And you'll find physicists saying that, the past, the future, present, it's all the same. It all happens at the same time. Time's an illusion. Nonsense. But you have to say that if you're a scientist and a materialist and a determinist, because when you're a determinist, there's no change. Change defines time. If there's no change, then there's no time, you see. So nothing changes, then time is undefined. It doesn't exist. So if you're a materialist, you have no time. And you have no consciousness, because there can be no choices. If you're a determinist, it means there are no choices. Everything's determined. And there can be no free will, because there's no choice to have free will for. So if you're a materialist, then you're a determinist. And you have to say that free will and consciousness and time are all illusions. On the other hand, if you take the opposite corner and you say, well, there is, consciousness does exist, and time does exist, and free will does exist, then you look at determinism and materialism and you say, oh, they're just illusions. So you see, we have these two opposite corners. One's time, free will, consciousness. The other one is materialism and determinism. And each one logically has to see the other as illusionary. Okay, well,
And
what does your experience tell you? Are you conscious? Do you make choices? Do you have free will? I mean, what's your fundamental experience tell you? Which of those is true? You see, and it's pretty obvious that determinism is a bad idea, because it's the null set. It doesn't go anywhere. It just is, period. It doesn't change. It doesn't grow. It doesn't evolve. It doesn't become. It just is, with no purpose and no point. Well, that's not logical. That's irrational. It doesn't make any sense. So I think now we are at a spot where technology, the internet specifically, is going to go together with the physicists. And I see this as this great big rock on the top of the hill, but the rock's in a divot. And the physicists there have these big crowbars, and they're trying to get this rock to go. And when they finally get that rock off out of that divot and it starts to roll down that hill, that's virtual reality. That's when the physicists say, yes, this is a virtual reality. And after that, stuff's just going to happen. Where's the computer? Who's the programmer? What in the heck is going on? What, this non-physical thing is true after all? That's what religions and spiritual practices and mysticism have been saying all along, and now we find out that's the truth. Well, that's going to change everything. And in an environment where we're all together communicating, it's not going to be in a bubble. It's going to be all of us. And if we all get to this idea that we are consciousness and we are here to care, we're here to evolve, we're here to love, we're here to ask, what can I give, not how much can I take? And if we get that idea, I can see that humanity can make a giant step forward in just a matter of decades. 3 or 4 or 5 decades, we can make a huge step forward. Well, here we are in that curve of evolution, and now we're starting to get faster and faster, and that can go very quickly, even though for 200,000 years, we're still in the warlord mentality, right? It's all control, power, force. That's kind of the way that's the way we organize ourselves, with control, power, and force. And that can end. And I think we're coming to that nexus of all these things where we're going to see a great leap forward.
And I think when science gets to the point where they realize there is a qualitative side, and, you mentioned love is an obvious force in nature. I spent a lifetime studying biological systems and observing that love is the ultimate entropy reduction, method at the cellular level. And, people that harbor any emotions other than love get disease. And so that's something that a lot of us can observe. We can observe society at large when there's a lack of love and cooperation. You have chaos, you have devolution instead of evolution. And so when science can measure love, which I believe is possible, I think that's where we're, going to get somewhere. So do you have any thoughts on the possibility of doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. You see, I define love as the nature of a low entropy consciousness. That's love. So it's an entropy measurement. And I see right now people like yourselves and thousands of others who are coming to these same conclusions in their own way on their own path. It's everywhere. You have biology, you have Bruce Lipton talking about, your genetics are not a prison, that you're stuck in. Your mind modifies those genetics. And we have, what's his name, a fellow that's from computer science and neuroscience, Donald Hoffman. And he says that this reality is a GUI, a GUI, a graphical interface, that we are something else behind it. Reality is behind the screen. Well, that's like the Buddha. This is an illusion, is what he's saying, and he's coming from neuroscience. And we have lots and lots of people who have come to the same conclusion, that love is indeed the answer. That's the key thing. It's relationship, the quality of those relationships. Nobody ever was lying on their deathbed saying, gee, I wish I had worked another day. You're lying on your deathbed, you're thinking about, gee, I wish I spent more time in relationships, because that's what's important, So, yeah, a lot of people are getting that. That's why I say in the next maybe 2 or 3 decades or 4 decades, I don't know, we're going to have that big ball start rolling down that hill. And when we do, if we're ready, if there's enough people listening to you, and your podcasts and your stuff and me and thousands of other people who are at this point now, I think we're ready to make that turn and say, yeah, okay, virtual reality. The source is consciousness. That's the only answer that makes sense, that the source is consciousness. That's the only thing that logically connects all the dots. And if we get to that, love is the answer is just a simple logical trip of, consciousness is a social system, and it's easy to prove that social systems will do more, will optimize the social system relative to their resources if they all cooperate and care. That's a trivial thing to show. So, the logic is all just laying out there. So yes, and as many ways as we can push on this, the better. You guys are doing your part. It's the same message. It's not the same message in the details, but where we're going with it is exactly the same message. And that's true with lots and lots of people these days. So I think the system, that larger consciousness system, is trying to get enough people thinking along these lines so that when that rock starts down that hill, we're not going to end up, my God's a better programmer than your God. All that kind of nonsense won't take hold. Well, people will try it, but it won't take hold. There will be a larger group of people that says, nah, been there, done that. We don't need to go that route. There's a better, more open, more inclusive way to think about this. And in that case, I see a big jump forward in the near future. And yes, we couldn't do it without technology. Technology makes it possible. It finally gets us out of the little local bubble into a world bubble. We're all here in this same bubble, and that's what technology is doing for us. So yeah, it's there. And yeah, there's lots of people that are part of this process, part of the solution. And
well, one thing we always say, Tom, is humanity, we are the greatest technology. And like Moore's law of exponential growth, we're seeing that. And so my hope is that we, as you say, we hit that in the next, I hope it's even faster than 3-year deck. I'd like to see it in the next few years. Call me an extreme optimist, but seriously, the Moore's law idea, right, of extreme exponential growth that we see in technology, we are the greatest technology, in my opinion. So Yeah, I mean, we could see it happen a lot faster than I would say, even in the next like 3-4 decades. Personally, I just see it happening. I feel like we're being pushed that way right now with everything that's happening with the current situation on the planet.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. We are being pushed that way.
There's a lot of entropy salesmen out there, so I think we better do something quick so we don't have to suffer the consequences of the simulation. Yeah, it's interesting, but I think really I don't look at outer events as chaos and negative. I look at it as a wake-up call, and I started this journey a long time ago, as I know you did. And I see more people waking up, having different conversations more than ever. And it's very gratifying. And I think as long as you don't watch television, you can stay in a very positive frame of mind and knowing that the change is happening and there's no way to stop it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the no way to stop it is very true, in that even if we go backwards, even if we do something really foolish, make poor decisions, we do get into the "my God's a better programmer than your God," food fight. Even if we go that way, we will turn around and go back the other way, because evolution is relentless. This is the forward, play. The forward arrow of evolution is toward love is the answer. And we will get there sooner or later, because whether we go backwards a few steps or not, that arrow of evolution is just going to keep chugging down that path, that direction. And absolutely, I know for certain, we will get there one day. We will live on this planet, as a family, as a cooperative, caring species. That's in our future. Absolutely. The thing is, how long is that going to take? Yes, it could take as short as 3 or 4 or 5 years. That's possible. I generally am not that optimistic. I am an optimist, but I think I'm being optimist when I'm saying a couple of decades, at the least.
I agree. What I mean by that, I mean kind of consensus of moving of in the next 3 or 4 years, more and more of the mainstream coming to conclusions that we have already, that you have already, that becoming more mainstream in the idea of it, not the actual implementation, the actual change, but the fact that we're already seeing it. Simulation theory is thrown around everywhere.
Yes.
So, it's become very mainstream in that sense. And people with movies like The Matrix, right, and stuff, people are really having that framework to understand that. Now, I bring up The Matrix for a reason. This is something that's always interested me. You say there's a machine and we're in this virtual reality and that we have these definite rules that we have to play by. Is it possible, as we evolve and as we get more in tune with like what Bob Monroe did at the Institute and actually teaching practical ways to go out of body and play with the non-physical realities, can we become the programmers of the virtual reality ourselves and actually manipulate the rules?
Probably not in the way you're thinking, but we can do certainly a whole lot more than what we're doing now. Let me put it in a little different way. The virtual reality has a rule set, and that rule set will probably stay very much the way it is as the rule set, okay? Because that rule set has to be very finely tuned in order for this physical universe to exist and be stable. If you change that rule set very much, you end up with a non-stable virtual reality. There's a couple of constants that they look at them and they say, well, even if these constants were changed just in a 10th decimal place, the whole universe would have collapsed or blown up, or we wouldn't have this reality. So the basic rule set, which is physics, chemistry, biology, that's what science does. They dig out the rules of the rule set. Well, that's going to mostly change. But what you can do within those rules is going to grow immensely. And the reason for that is that we, consciousness, have 2 fundamental ways of processing information. One of those ways is intellectual. It's one way, okay? That's your intellect. It uses logic. Logic is the tool. Okay, so you have your intellectual side and your logic is the tool. The other side is intuitive. Okay, and intuitive is beyond logic. It doesn't have logic. It doesn't have a set of steps you get to. You just get the information. It's intuitive. Now, that intuitive side is just as accurate and just as reliable as that intellectual side with its logic. It's just that we've never developed it. We spend 50 years of our life honing our intellectual side and our logical side. Oh, we're good at that. But we deny mostly even that we have an intuitive side. And if we do, we find it unreliable. We don't depend on it. So we don't work with it. But when we will work with it, this is the point you're getting. When we get to that point where we have the bigger picture and we realize that the other half of our ability to work with information is intuitive and start working with that side, we will find that all the things that are now paranormal are just normal. These are things that we can use. These are things that we can use to enrich our life, to help us be better at giving and loving and caring. There's information out there that's available. There's databases out there that are required for the rendering engine to make this virtual reality. And we can get into those databases. Now Buddha called those databases the Akashic records, but they're just databases, and I can show that they are required for the rendering engine. And we're consciousness, they're in consciousness. We can sort that data, but we don't get it logically. We don't get it in sentences. We get it intuitively in chunks. And with practice, those chunks become very reliable and very accurate. So remote viewing, telepathy, getting information about people, connecting with them emotionally, understanding where they are emotionally, what their feelings are, what's important to them. All of that is there. It's all this information. When people see auras, they're just getting data out of the database. Remote viewing is getting data out of the database. And we have this other thing in our reality that says that we can modify future probability with our intent. So there is this future probability that the system needs to know to be ready to compute on the fly, this virtual reality, and we can modify those probabilities with our intent. That's why we have a placebo effect. That's why positive thinking, creates positive results, and negative thinking creates negative results. We have intention. That's why most illnesses are because of negativity. The negative mind leads, the body follows. Negative mind then creates dysfunctional mind creates a dysfunctional body. And most illnesses can be healed if you have that positive mind. If you can get that mind focused on the healing, then all the things that need to happen to heal tend to take place. So the mind is a powerful tool that we don't use much. And the rule set will stay about the same, but what we can do and how we can interact with each other and how we can affect things here, that can change a great deal. But that doesn't mean the rule set needs to change. It just means that we need to harness that intuitive side and take advantage of that. Now, if we take advantage of it for our ego, and because we want to control other people, well, that has a very, that doesn't work very well. That kind of self-destructs. It doesn't function. Oh, you can function. You can be a big fish in a small pond. So you can be the voodoo guy with a bunch of people who don't understand, and you can scare them and create problems for them. But basically, you can't be very strong, and you're not going to be very powerful as long as you're working on the negative side. It's just a very limited side that doesn't go very far and is self-destructive. So we will go through all kinds of things there too. We'll have dysfunctional people using their intent for dysfunctional things, but that'll all work its way out again with evolution. That'll fix it. So yes, it will be a different place in the way we interact. Telepathy will be common. We do that now. We just don't recognize it. We're all interacting with each other all the time. We just don't know. How many times have you thought about somebody you haven't talked to for 15 years, and you think about them, and then within a couple of days, the phone rings and they call you up, it just, it's the way it is. It's easy to do. Yeah, I teach courses in that. I teach people how to remote view and talk telepathy, talk to dead people, all those sorts of things. You can do that, and you can do it very accurately, and you can do it when you want to, get the material you need and have a lot of confidence in it. But that takes effort. It's not easy. Using your intellect well and being logical isn't easy either. That's something we work at, but you can do it. It's a real interesting thing there.
You're talking about personal responsibility and not externalizing your issues, externalizing the world, but going in within and doing the work, which is what I always talk about, doing the personal work before we can have this global community. We're all a node, right, in the network. And and in order for the network to work appropriately, each node has to be doing its part. And so one thing I loved about reading Bob Monroe's books when I was in high school, because I got really into the out of body stuff, is that it was very practical, very pragmatic. It wasn't like a spiritual text. It was just like very Western minded, just like, oh, all of a sudden I'm slipping out of my body. What the heck is going on here? Let's figure this out. And it became like a fun experiment, right? And I guess getting it, and this is a good segue, is so that some of our audience can start to learn how to do this stuff, is when your own practice, you came from a very scientific mind in college, and then what did you learn about? You learned about meditation. And that was kind of your entryway, right, into a lot of this practice. So maybe if we could just give some practical advice to people listening going, how can I start doing this? What is, in your mind, the best way to start going into this stuff, and then so that they could be prepped and ready if they are in that space of mind and heart to start doing this stuff? Because not everybody's ready to start doing this. Everyone's on a different path. But and I have a feeling you're going to say meditation, but what's the best way to start really getting into this? And then how can we start moving forward into those coursework that you provide so that we can start playing with our consciousness more? Because I feel like that's paramount for everybody now.
Okay, well, I'll give a short view of this, or a very quick view of it, and then I can tell them some resources they can use where they can get a whole lot more detail.
Fantastic.
Yes, meditation is a piece of it, but it's not the whole piece. Meditation gives you one of the attributes that's necessary, and that is you have to be able to quiet your mind. If you have a mind that's constantly running full of thoughts, things that are going on, what am I going to have for dinner? What should I do next? What's on my schedule? And then your mind's just constantly yammering away, then you're not going to be successful with your intuition, because you keep interrupting yourself. Every time your intellect takes charge, your intuition stops. These things work like one at a time, if you like. So if your mind keeps running, then your intuition is constantly interrupted. So quiet mind, and we get that through meditation. That's the whole point of learning to meditate, is that you can sit quietly in that, what I call the Descartes moment, right? I think, therefore I am. The only thing you are aware of is that you am, I am, I exist. That's it. You're not having anything else going on in your mind other than the fact that you exist. So that is training your mind to settle down and be able to be quiet and listen and be aware. So that's just one thing you need to learn. The other thing you need to learn, particularly in our culture, particularly among people who are left-brained and logical process-oriented, you have to learn to let the intellect go. We have a habit in our world of leading with our intellect. Anything comes up, our intellect immediately jumps up front, assesses it, vets it, decides, what it can do with that or what it can't do with that, and what value it is. And all of that's intellectual analysis, judging, comparing. All of that stuff will stop an intuitive process. So you need to let that go. And that is probably the harder thing for people to do than really to learn to meditate, is to let that intellect sit down and be quiet, just be still, open your mind and accept what comes there without your intellect jumping in front, trying to assess it, analyze it, judge it, compare it, and work with it. People who are left brain have a very hard time with that. If you're right brain, well, that's what makes you right brain. You're already sort of like that. You're already intuitive. And that becomes, it's a lot easier for you to do that. But if you're not, and in our culture, we reward left brain kind of thinking, logical thinking, and we make fun of right brain thinking. We call those people airheads and space cadets and things like that because they seem to be out of it, They don't do logical process, but yet those people who are out of it can come up with conclusions and answers often much quicker than we do because they see bigger pictures. They don't have to get there through logical process. So that's the second thing, okay? You need to get that intellect to just sit down and be quiet. Real hard problem for the left brainers. Now, if you can do that, the rest of it is easy and just takes a little practice. So those are just the two things. It's a really easy thing to do. You talk about going out of body. Well, out of body is a very poor name. You're not in your body. Your body is an avatar. It's computed. It's just information. It doesn't even exist. Your consciousness, you're already out of your body. All you need to do is switch data streams. So you're getting a data stream from the computer that defines this reality. Well, pick up another data stream that's defining some other reality in some other place, and there you are in that reality. Well, we do that naturally when we dream. When we dream at night, we're getting data from another data stream. It's not defining this physical reality, it's defining some other reality. And nobody has a big trouble dreaming. It's not like, oh, gee, dreaming. I've been working on dreaming for decades and can't seem to do it. And people just dream. It's natural. Going out of body is easy too. All you do is just switch data streams. But now you say, well, that sounds easy, but I know it isn't that easy. The reason it isn't that easy is you say, well, how do I switch a data stream? And as soon as you say that, your intellect wants to try to figure that out. It says, well, tell me the steps and I'll do it. Well, the intellect wants to get in charge of that process. As soon as the intellect gets in charge of the process is dead. It isn't going to work. So you see the problem there with that intellect. The intellect wants to solve the problem, but in solving the problem, it makes the problem impossible to solve. That's its problem. So you get to the point that you can just be in that meditation state, open, empty, and then have an intent. Intent is the motive force in consciousness. When you have an intent, let's say a piece of information, you want to know, maybe you're remote viewing and you want to know what's going on, back someplace else. Somebody maybe lives on someplace else and you can call them up and ask them. So you just want to check it out. So you just open your mind and you have an intention to get that information. You may get it in pictures, you may get it in other ways, but you just open it. And the first thing that comes to your mind is the best thing, because in consciousness, the searching the database is 1,000, maybe 1,000,000 times faster than it is in searching Google. Google takes about a second to come back with your answers. It's only microseconds, that before you get the answer back from consciousness query. So a lot of people aren't even aware. That's just noise in their mind. They're not empty. So noise in their mind, they're used to that. They just, push it aside. So they can't get the information because it's just like all the rest of the noise in their mind and they push it aside. So you have that clear mind and you'll instantly get something, then that's it. Now, in the beginning, it's hard to get all the detail, just like it is in the beginning with your intellect. It's hard to, take really big bites. You need to take small bites. So do your remote viewing, not just in the whole thing, but look at attributes of the thing. What are the colors? What are the dominant colors? What is it? Does it have an odor? Does it have a sound? Does it, is it happy? Is it sad? You go through all of these things you can think, write down, 20 or 30 questions like that and ask each one of them. And then when you're done, then go check the source and see how well you did. And you'll probably find out that you got 60, 70% of all the attribute things, but you didn't necessarily get the big picture. Well, that's because you're not real good at it yet. It takes practice to get good at it. So it's easy to do remote viewing because you Google remote viewing targets. If you Google that, you'll get a half a dozen sites that will give you remote viewing targets. And what these are, you'll get a number, usually a 5 or 6 digit number. Each number has a picture associated with it. You get the number, you remote view, what's the picture associated with this number? And then you type the number into your computer and up comes the picture, the truth data. So it makes it really, really easy to practice remote viewing. All you need is a cell phone or a smartphone or a computer, and you have an endless amount of targets that take you zero time to get, so that helps. But do it with, when you look at that picture, what does it smell like? What does it feel like? Is it big and expansive or is it small and detailed? Just all these questions, happy, sad, like you may hear children giggling. Well, write that down. Happy, children giggling. Who knows what that means? Maybe it's a birthday party, maybe it's kids at a circus. You don't know what it's going to be, but just write everything down and don't try to make sense of it. Your intellect is going to want to try to name it. Don't name it because that lets your intellect get in charge. And as soon as your intellect gets in charge, it's gone. So just take the data and put it down. Well, I feel like there's lines going like this. So I'll just put lines like that on my paper. And now I see there's a circle over here. All right, there's a zigzaggy thing down there. Just do that. Don't try to say, now, what does that look like? Oh, it doesn't look like anything. It's garbage. I'm just getting garbage. See, that's your intellect. Just put it down. Do it. And then later, look at it, and you'll be surprised. Oh, that circle. Yeah, that's that water tower that was right over there. And that zigzaggy line, yeah, that's that road going up that mountain. And, and things will start to make sense. But eventually you can get to the point that you can see the whole big picture more easily, but you got to start small with the details. So that's a way to do that. Now, out of body isn't so magic. We're already out of our body. Out of body is mostly a single player virtual reality game. Okay. This physical reality is a multiplayer virtual reality game. Out of body is a single player virtual reality game, right? There's consciousness, that's real. Everything else is virtual. In fact, anything that involves experience, anything that's experiential is virtual. Experience requires rules. Experience requires context in which the experience makes sense, in which the experience is experienced. It's context-based. Well, the context is offered by the rules. See, rules create the context for which experience can happen. If we just say, okay, let's play a game, guys. You and Mike and Byron and I, let's just play a game. Go ahead, your turn, go. See, you don't know what to do because there's no rules. If there's no rules, there's no context. Without the rules, there's no experience, there's no interaction, there's no strategy, there's no way to relate. It's just nothing. So you have virtual realities are where all the experiences. So when you're having an experience and out of body, you're just a different virtual reality, you see. And that's just another data stream from the larger consciousness system. And that data stream is going to give you experiences and lets you see and hear and feel and have conversations that will be meaningful for you if you understand them. Most dreams are like that too. They're meaningful to you if you pay attention to them. The system's trying to educate us and giving us choices everywhere because that's the name of the game. Make choices, and by those choices, you evolve.
But Tom, those on those realms that you go to, those are objectively real places. Those aren't just a subjective, more kind of real dream, right? Isn't the idea that you're potentially going to these other virtual realities that others can experience at the same time, other individuated consciousness, whether it be your friend that goes that you could meet? Like you tell the story of you doing this with your son, right? When you, and so, and I've read a lot on this, and I understand that there's other realities that are collectively controlled consciousness realities where all the people form that reality together.
Right.
So I guess my point is these a lot of people believe, well, that's just your own dream. That's just a trippy dream. But I think it's important to understand these have objective rule sets that others can experience the same because they have an objective reality to themselves.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yes. Some are like that. Some are not like that. Some are just an individual game for you. And other people will get a game that is designed to help them learn, in their own way. And they're not going to get in your same game. I guess I should say it this way. There is nothing more real than information. Information is as real as it gets. Okay? So when you get a data stream, that data stream defines your reality. You interpret that data to be your reality. And whether that's a dream or whether it's this physical reality, you get data, you interpret it as that reality, period. Now, I've gone to a lot of other virtual realities that have very tight rule sets like this one. So they feel physical. The rule set's tight, so it's a physical kind of reality. Now, that physical reality is there because the system doesn't have all its eggs in one basket. It's got multiple realities going on, evolving. So you could go to that reality and you would see the same kind of creatures I see. Okay, if you go to that reality, because that's a thing that the system has going. But you can also go out of body, get a data stream from the system that's there to help you learn, and that's just yours. Somebody else goes, they're going to get a different data stream. They're not necessarily going to see the same stuff. So don't think of the larger consciousness space like thinking of Chicago and New York. There are places that exist and they are a certain way, and everybody that goes there will see the same thing. It's information. Everybody interprets that information differently. You interpret it based on your own history, your beliefs, your fears, your knowledge, your lack of knowledge. All of that goes into your interpretation. So everybody sees a little different reality. Now, if it's a multiplayer game, now you have shared stuff, right? You both see the same table that's in the room. It's a multiplayer game. That's different. If it's a single player game, then it's just yours. And all the other people and characters and critters in there are NPCs. It's something that the computer puts in there because they're part of your learning process. So you see, if you're in one, then yes, if you're in like that other reality that's more physical, yes, you and I could go to the same thing. I've been out of body, took my son out of body. I went out of body with Dennis Menerick, the guy that I was working with out at Bob's. And we went out on an adventure and went out of body and saw the same things, interacted with each other. That was a 2-player game. See, and you can have maybe 3 or 4-player games, but mostly they're one-player games. And this idea that when you get out of body, first thing you'll do is turn around and look and see your body lying in a bed. That's because you believe that you're in your body. You're not in your body. But if you believe you are, then that's where you're going to be. You're going to be in your bedroom, probably floating up, and you're going to look down and see your body. But that's
I've had that experience, and I've snapped right back in.
Yeah, that's because you have a belief that you're getting out of your body. That's why you do that. If you don't have that belief, then you don't necessarily see your body on the way out. You just go. It's instant. So, when I say that it's just as simple as switching data streams, and that's as simple as just an intent. That means once you really understand, you can be out of body in tenths of a second. It's just a shift with your intent. It's not a thing that takes time to do. And eventually, your reality, as you get more into the intuitive space and into the consciousness space, your own personal decision space grows, and you start living in a bigger reality. You don't live just in the physical reality. You live in a reality that's bigger than just physical stuff. You guys do that now. Your reality is more than just the physical stuff in it. You connect with people. You understand. You have feelings with those people. You know how they're feeling and what they're thinking and who they are and what they are. And you you care for them. And you have a lot of things going on that aren't just physical. You have physical and non-physical stuff going on all the time. And that just deepens and broadens as, the more you go down this path. It gets to where that, you tend to live at the being level and only go out to that intellect when you need it.
So, Tom, beyond intent, how important is purpose, as far as determining the success of your experimentation? For instance, just doing it for the pureness of discovery versus an ego desire to experience phenomena?
Purpose is very important. And I break that purpose into several categories. The best of all purposes is that you want to learn, you want to grow, you want to evolve the quality of your consciousness. If that's your purpose, then you'll go a lot faster and it will be more meaningful to you. You'll understand a lot quicker. The next best thing is that you're curious. You want to prove to yourself that this larger reality indeed does exist. And it is like, and what it's like and how it works. And you're just curious. That would be like the second best. If we go on downhill to one that's not so good, your ego says, wow, powers. I'd like to have those powers. Geez, I'd like to remote view the ladies' locker room. That would be cool. You just want to do things because,
I want to see the future lotto ticket.
Yeah, I want to see the future lotto ticket, right? Things like that. And those are very ineffective. They're not that's not on the fast path to going anywhere at all. And then, of course, below that is one even worse, which is I want to use it to manipulate. I want to use it to hurt. I want to use it, send me $100 a month or I'll make your children sick. I'll use my mind to create illness, which is a possibility too. Change probability with your mind and you can misuse it as well. It's a tool. So that would be the worst possible thing. So
are there universal laws though that protect consciousness or in general from that manifesting?
Yes, there's some. There's several rules about this virtual reality. One is that entities outside the virtual reality only get to come here and interact in very limited ways. So there's a bunch of rules about that. So, you can't have an effective schoolhouse, particularly like ours, elementary school. You can't have a bunch of, 5-year-olds and have, the high schoolers running through the halls and running through the classrooms. That doesn't work. So we got rules like that. And the basic rule is, though, that the fact that intellect and ego and beliefs get in the way, if you're motivated from intellect and ego and beliefs, they get in the way. They slow you down. So if what you want to do is manipulate your boss into giving you a raise, well, you can use your mind to plant that thought in his head. But at the same time, you're going to plant a thought in his head that you are untrustworthy, that you're a sneaky kind of person and you're devious. And you're going to plant that in his head too. You see, so it sows the seeds of its own destruction. So yes, you can plant something in the boss's head. Yeah, give me a raise. I deserve a raise more than the other people in the office. And the boss will have that thought, but he'll also think, yeah, but that guy, Tom, he's just a little sneaky. I don't know that I trust him so much. You see, so.
Well, it's the same way in physical reality. If you're sneaking around, like trying to do shortcuts, you'll end up paying in the end, right? And
right, exactly. There's a price to pay for all of that stuff. And of course, the biggest price is that if what you're doing is shaking people down with threats because you know how to use your mind to make them sick or ill or do something nasty to them, you're de-evolving. You're on a path of de-evolution. And the more you de-evolve, the less power you're going to have. You're heading in the wrong direction. So that's kind of at the outer level, that's the big problem. You keep de-evolving and de-evolving, and pretty soon, you can't do anything.
Tom, have you ever had experiences with negative entities? I know when I was in high school and slipping out out of body and having these experiences, I had a weird experience that kind of shook me to the core, where I felt there was a presence in my parents' bathroom, and I was there and I was struggling and like kind of battling with this like kind of heavy force. And it came down to my will finally to overcome this force, to push it out of the house. It was like I had to put everything in my entire being and know that I am truth and love, and that I could, you could say, be gone kind of thing. And then it left, and it left me exhausted and really kind of frazzled. And I was like, what was that? Because it definitely felt like kind of a dark force. And maybe a psychologist will say that was me battling my own demons, but it felt like it was a third party presence. Have you ever had any of those kind of experiences?
I've been through all of that too. That's what young men get into when they're young and they're doing these kinds of things. That's kind of a typical thing. But I would agree with the psychologist to a large extent. What happens is that here you can use your intent to create by changing probabilities. Now, it doesn't mean you get anything you want. It just means you can change probabilities. Okay. But when you're in the non-physical, when you're not in this rule set, when you're out of body, the rule set's a lot looser. There's a lot of other things you can do. And your intent starts to manifest things. It starts to create things. Whereas here, that's not. Here, it might take months and months to create something with an intent. There, it takes seconds to create things. And if you are fearful, oh, I'm in a strange place. How do I know the strange place isn't hostile? We're not in Kansas anymore, and I have no idea whether there's boogeyman out there or what. And that will create a boogeyman just like that. You'll have one. And then it's going to be, oh, what am I going to do with this thing? And then it's a matter of will. And some of that I call fear tests, because the system does try to keep people out of the out of body who are very fearful. Because if you're very fearful, you will get terrified there. And if you get terrified there, then you're worse off than you were before you ever went. So it's actually going backwards for you. So the system doesn't want you to get there. But see, you weren't that terrified. You dealt with it. It exhausted you, of course, because that's just kind of the way it had to work out. You didn't have the confidence just to say, be gone. Yeah. Or the confidence to walk up and say, hey, how you doing? What's your name? I'm George. I'm Mike. Where do you live? What's your neighborhood like? Or just walk up and give it a hug. Whoo, you look kind of bad and scary, but I'm going to give you a big hug because I love you too. If you did that, poof, it'd have been gone just like that. But you didn't. You fought with it. You had to force it out. You had to use force to get rid of it. And it took your last ounce of energy, but there was enough confidence in you rather than terror that you could do that. You see, so you passed a fear test. And you may get another fear test and another fear test. And eventually you realize, young males tend to spend a lot of time in the non-physical, in martial arts, and all kinds of fighting and struggling and dealing with the negative entities and saving the world and doing all the things that are in young men's minds. So that's just what they find, and that's what they do. And eventually that too shall pass and you won't have a lot of that. So that's one kind of negative entities that you run into, and that's most of it. There's another, which is perhaps just some other IUOC who is being negative, who is trying to use their intent to give you a problem for one reason or another. And now that's different. You see, that's a different kind of thing. That's not something you manufacture. That's something that is there. And it is negative, and it is maybe trying to do you harm. So that's the voodoo guy someplace else trying to, do harm.
Someone called them the archons.
Yeah, or it's one of your employees trying to encourage you to give one a raise other than the others. So there will be things that will from other IUOCs, individual units of consciousness, that will be coming to manipulate you one way or another for any number of reasons. So that's a different thing than the things that are, than the things you see. Like Bob Monroe, most of what he saw and described were things that he got in a data stream from the LCS. And they were there for his own growth and learning. And he came here to write that book. That's why he wrote the book. And that's why it happened to him. And he wrote the book like it was a diary. He wasn't trying to give it purpose or meaning or theology or explanation. He just said, hey, this is what happened to me, and that's what made it credible. So millions of people got a bigger idea of a bigger reality because of Bob's book. And that was the whole point. That was part of the, we're softening up the human race to make this big decision when that ball starts rolling down that hill, so anything that opens minds is good.
So where would you say psychedelics come to play with people like to maybe use, that to accelerate out of body experiences and things? And of course, what Mike's describing, is, frequently experienced by people having so-called bad trips. They just aren't ready to go into that realm in the first place. But those are becoming popular again in certain circles, ayahuasca and that sort of thing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts on that are that if one uses that once or twice in order to blast themselves into the larger system, and it will do that. It is blasting you into the larger system, and you are, the reality you end up in is as valid, it's information as any other reality. Again, nothing more real than information. So the information you get there is real. But if you use it as a mind opener, it tends to work out pretty good for the people who use it that way. If it becomes something that you have to keep doing, in other words, that's the only way you get there is by taking the drug, that usually turns out to be a bad thing and a negative for that individual. And I've known a fair number of people who have done it both ways. So that's just a general, it's just a general rule of thumb. It doesn't mean there aren't exceptions on both sides, but that's a general rule of thumb. And the reason for that is you don't evolve, you don't grow up because you've had an experience. Experience doesn't grow you up. So you can get blasted into the great beyond with, what was a drug of choice some years back? Wasn't ayahuasca, but it was, I don't know, it doesn't come to me now, but you can go there. And if it's just, wow, gee whiz, this is
DMT.
DMT, yeah, that's it. So if you get some DMT and you go out there and wow, quite a trip. I saw this, I saw that, and you'll get information. Often you'll get good information while you're there. But if it's an experience, then put that in the same category as getting on a really good roller coaster. It's an experience. Whoa, and your hands up in the air. Wow, it's an experience. But it doesn't make you grow up. You don't grow up from experiences. You grow up from making good choices. When you make good choices, that's how you grow up. You are, your actions, you're doing it. It's you, it's your intention. And just having an experience won't help you grow up. And the problem is that people have those experiences. They feel like they're awesome, life-changing experiences. As a matter of fact, the guy that wrote the DMT magic molecule, I don't know, he did a book on DMT. He put a lot of people through his process of DMT.
Terrence McKenna?
No. This was a psychologist, psychiatrist, yes. And he put a lot of people through it. He had DMT, the something molecule, I believe. Anyway, he wrote a book about that. Well, he put dozens of people through this, but he had clinical settings, right? So he gave them a measured amount. They were in a bed. They were, they were monitored. Their vital statistics were all monitored. Then they
Rick Strassman.
Strassman, yes, Strassman. That's the guy. And so he interviewed them before. He interviewed them afterwards. He gave them psychological tests. So it was more of a clinical research environment. And most of these people all had what they described as life-changing viewpoints, life-changing experiences, sort of like the NDEs, near-death experience people often have life-changing experiences. Mm-hmm. And afterward, I think it was a year later or something, he went back to all the same people and interviewed and retested and so on. And his conclusion was that most of them weren't all that different than they were before they started his program. There really wasn't any obvious growth going on there. You know, they weren't different people who saw the world in a different way. They were pretty much the same people that saw the world in the same way they did before. So it wasn't a growth experience, even though they described it as totally changing. Well, it was an experience. It was a peak experience, a mind-blowing experience, but that doesn't make you grow up. You become love by making good choices, by caring about people and acting like you care. Well, I shouldn't say acting. It's not acting, it's being. You know, it's not that you should act kind. You need to be kind. And that being is translated in what you do, the choices you make and how you make them, your intentions. And that's what grows you up. So the drugs are an experience, but they aren't going to help you grow up in and of themselves. But they will show you things. But, you know, it's... So I don't recommend it really as a way of learning or spiritual growth, because I don't think it gives you spiritual growth. Most of the guys that I've seen, they'll do the drug once or twice. The ones I've seen that actually have done well with the drugs, they do it once or twice, and then they go on the internet to say, what's going on here? And they become seekers, and they start to learn and grow without the drugs. And the drug just woke them up. That seems to have been a good arrangement. But the ones that it doesn't just wake them up, but they want another experience and they want another one, and they can hardly wait to that next big, awesome experience. So they take the drug again and they take the drug again. I talked to them a year or two later, and I find them that they've drifted into negativity mostly, because their experiences went from positive in the beginning and awesome to something a little darker after a while. And they're starting to see dark things, and they're starting to interact with stuff, and they're given plans and things they're supposed to do and places they're supposed to go. And this thing develops, and generally it's very dysfunctional, and they get a little paranoid and other things. So that's what I've seen.
Yeah, I've observed that same exact thing over the years. People tend to just fall into it as a crutch. And like you say, rather than a life-changing experience, it sends them down a different road. They think drugs are the answer. And
Right.
after a while, a lot of them I've seen, reach that point of no return.
Absolutely. Well, they're convinced in their own mind that they are more spiritual, more understanding, that their understanding is greater than other people. So their ego immediately starts to grow. Well, that is not a sign of growing up. That's a sign of de-evolution. And they feel superior in that, well, I know, and you guys who haven't done this, you just don't understand. Then they tend to just hang out with other people who do the drugs. Mm-hmm. Their associations tend to be people who do drugs. They all pat each other on the back, telling each other how spiritual they are. And yeah, the whole thing just de-evolves into something that's not very pretty. And they get to the point that they have trouble holding their job. They have trouble staying focused. Their minds tend to be scattered. So, they lose their job. They do this, they do that. And pretty soon they're just like most other druggies. They're kind of on a dead end path that is taking them more and more into dysfunction. So, yeah.
You know what it is? It's like this trend is don't take shortcuts. Like,
absolutely.
Don't try to manipulate your boss to get a raise. Work to get the raise. Don't try to take drugs to expand your consciousness. Work to expand your consciousness, because that's what consciousness is. It's doing the work, your self-improvement, getting in touch with yourself and love and everyone around you, and building that holistic mindset, right, of everything connected. Yeah. That's what health is. That's what we always talk about health. People, same with the health world. Oh, I've got a symptom. Let's go to the doctor to give me some external thing to fix myself, instead of me looking internally to see what's causing that. Stop taking shortcuts, people. The biohacking thing drives me crazy because it's like, I'm going to hack my consciousness. And I just saw this new conference where they're talking about this thing to help you meditate, where you just put headphones on and it takes all the work away. You can get right to a meditative state without having to do any of the work. I mean, I literally just got an email about this yesterday. I'm like, that's why we talk about martial arts. We talk about meditation. We talk about breath work. We talk about yoga. It's like, there are really cool things you can do that are a practice. It's like playing piano, right? You can't just jump on the piano and become, get all the ladies right away, as you say. But one thing that interests me, Bob, is about your book, where when you're younger, Tom, and there's the guys in the non-physical form that have the book that say, you're not supposed to be here anymore. We're kicking you out. Okay. And those who read the Big Toe book will know what I'm talking about. Have you figured out yet what they knew? Was this where you are now? Because you were supposed to be here to tell the world about this. And have you figured out why they kicked you out and what they knew when they were looking at their little notebook?
Yeah, I figured out some of it. It's hard when you're looking upstream to figure things out. If you're in a job or a situation, you can look down. You can look down the hierarchy, down to the mailroom, and you can kind of understand everybody that's there and what they're doing and why they're doing it, because you've been there. You've worked up through all that stuff. But when you start to look up and say, now, what are those executives thinking about? What's the CEO? What's he have on his mind? That's a lot harder, because you've not been there and you're just not in that space. So you say, well, it's probably the same thing I have on my mind. And you think everybody's just like you, and you make a lot of bad choices that way, but you really don't know. So looking upstream is a tough thing. It's easy to make assumptions, but I think I've come to some conclusions about it, but they're not fixed. I was sort of, picked for this job, like Bob Monroe was picked for his job. And in the non-physical at that time, and still is, there's a fair amount of what should we say, argument about which way to go. I mean, everybody knows what the goal is, but there's always a lot of ways to get to that goal. And there's some people who would say, well, the best way is just, like the pacifists, don't join them. You got to rise above them. So if they're going to come and, do something to you, well, you don't be violent. You let that happen. You just back off, because otherwise you're being just like them. So you have that viewpoint. And then you have another viewpoint that says, no, that's crazy. If somebody comes and pushes you, then you have an obligation to push back, because that's evil there that's trying to overwhelm your free will. And that's wrong. And to just let wrong things happen is not part of the solution, it's part of the problem. You say, so there's different entities have different attitudes about the way things should progress. And that means that in the non-physical, in the realm of where choices are being made and they're trying to help us evolve, there's such a thing as politics. Politics just means differences of opinions about how to do something, that creates politics. So there was politics there at that time. And at that time, that was back in, I was very young then, 7 years old or something. The management structure was different than it is now and had different opinions. And there were those that agreed with management and those that disagreed with management. And the group that was teaching me and that I was a part of disagreed with management at that point. So that's kind of what the process was all about. So yes, there's politics everywhere, because there's always multiple ways to solve a problem. And people get into those ways, and they struggle then with each other, because decisions have to be made, choices have to be made. You're going to do things or not do things, and which way do you do? Do you do it the way A wants or the way B wants? So struggle and politics is not just here, it's everywhere. Mm-hmm. And that's what those things were all about. And I was being groomed from a very young age. Like I say, I was like 6 or 7 when I was doing those out-of-body things as a young child. And I was being taught. And when I was out of body, I was like 20-something. You know, I was an adult, young adult. And then I'd go back in and I was like 6 years old and a child. And that was just an amazing transformation, you know, that you went from being aware and, you know, kind of in charge of things to, you know, to being small and totally dependent on everybody, you know, for everything important. So but I was being taught, I was being groomed for some, you know, position, some work to do. And I was definitely on side B, not on side A. So that politics changed, and now that side actually kind of ran into trouble. And that was more the pacifist side. Actually, they kind of ran into trouble. It didn't work out too well for them, as you might guess. You know, being a pacifist is not really a good long-term idea unless you're rooting for the bad guys. You know, it's good for them. But it's not really. There's a time where you need to fight back. There's a time when you need to, you know, stand up and say no. And there's a time to turn the other cheek and, you know, let things go. But you have to know the difference. And you have to have good reasons. You're not doing it for your ego, for your beliefs. You got to do it because it's right, because it's low entropy, because it's the best thing to do for everybody. And anyway, so now the crowd that was not in favor of that, you know, turn the cheek is in charge and has been for about 30 years now. And that made everything different. But that was where the politics were then. And that was probably a time when the politics were at a peak. You know, politics, sometimes everybody sort of agrees and the differences are kind of minor. They're kind of picky, but sometimes the politics are really, you know, polarized and the differences are huge. And at that time, it was more polarized, which was why I got jerked into that court situation, if you say. That was because that was the struggle of A versus B, and I was just caught in it.
So now the forces that are the main body politic of that non-physical world are more in terms of action and proactive
yes.
growth. That makes sense, seeing where we are right now in the world.
Absolutely. That switch took place about a year or two before the Berlin Wall came down.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I remember telling some guy who was here from Poland, actually. He had, I think he was from Poland. He had jumped ship. And that was back when Poland was part of the USSR. And he had jumped ship in Texas, in the Gulf. Swam to shore, got political asylum. He still had a wife and child back in Poland. And I was talking to him, and he did get his wife and child to come visit him. And while they were here, I told him that they should look for in the near change, all that changing. You know, and they looked at me and said, no, that's just the way it is. It's been that way for, you know, for 50 years, and that's not going to change. And because the management just had turned over, and I knew it was a whole new attitude going on. Mm-hmm. So sure enough, within a couple of years, the wall came down. Nelson Mandela kind of broke the back of apartheid in South Africa. And what did we had? Czechoslovakia broke out a spring, you know, what do they call it? I can't remember that. Back in the 70s, you remember that, Bear? Back when, you know, in the 70s, when lots of good things were breaking out all over. People around the world seemed to have this idea that peace is the answer, not war. And anyway, so all of that kind of was taking place shortly after that. And that was just because the force that was holding what I call the positive side back from acting, because the dominant force was not to act, it was just let it happen however it happened. But the negative side never lets it happen however it happens. They always cheat, you know, because that's what negative side means. They're not all about love. They're all about ego and getting what they want. And the other side cheats. And if the side that doesn't cheat just lets everything happen and lets the negative kind of cheat and get away with it because we wouldn't want to, lower ourselves to that level, then everything starts to go bad. And that's where it was. And it was on a knife edge of getting to the point where if it went much further, it would just slide down that negative space. And that's where we were back then. And that's when
hence World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War. I mean, that makes sense. It reflects the physical reality.
So that was where we were. It was real close to that knife edge of the point of no return. If the negativity gets this much of a hold, then it's just going to snowball. You're going to have this big downward spiral, and it's all going to be negative. It won't stop till you hit the bottom. Then you have to work your way back out of it. So just before it got to that point of no return, things changed. And that was a purposeful thing. The change was made because the inevitability was seen. The probable future was seen as going backwards, not forwards. So there was a change, and that change then created a lot of other changes. We had perestroika, right, in the Soviet Union. Followed that a few years later, where they kind of changed things. Well, a lot of that change is kind of it's been slip sliding away recently. But then I see that as we're poised on this edge to really take some big steps forward in being caring. And I think the forces that are opposed to that, they're still locked into control, power, force. They see that trend. They see that coming, and they are pulling out all the stops, kind of the last big hurrah, I guess, for the control, power, and force guys. They're doing their best to dominate and control and whatever, pulling out all the stops to do as much as they can. And I just think they're going to fail, because that's not where this wave is taking us. The things that...
Well, I was just, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to say the greatest level of mastery is be able to draw your line in the sand and even back it up with force if necessary. But the motive is love. You're doing it to preserve beauty, to preserve harmony, to preserve the free will of all of life everywhere. So even if it takes physical force, it's not done out of anger or out of fear. So once again, the love force comes in. It's kind of the old Aikido principle, right?
Absolutely. It's, I look at it, of course, in terms of entropy. Can't help that. I'm a physicist, but that just comes with the territory. But I look at it in terms of entropy. You make choices that will result in the lowest entropy for yourself and others, for the whole system. So if by defeating evil, you're going to lower entropy, you're going to make things better for everybody, then that violence is required. It's not only optional, but you need to step into that, you need to step up to that line in the sand and hold it as best you can. So that's, because that's the low entropy solution. Now, if you're doing it right out of fear, you're doing it out of ego. Oh, I want to win this because then I'll be in charge, and I'll be the big guy and I'll be able to tell everybody what to do. Well, that's not the right reason. That's another high entropy solution. So you have, and all your choices are like that. All life's choices, should I do this or that? Should I, what choices should I make? Well, your choices should always be made to minimize the entropy for yourself and others, for you and the system. Long term, not short term, but long term. And if that's what you're trying to do, then go ahead and do it. And if it turns out you were wrong, well, learn from it. Do better next time. But that's just the way life works. That's how people grow up, is they try to compute what's the right thing to do for low entropy. They do it. Then they look at it. They study it. And say, how did that come out? Was that good for most everybody or not? And if the answer is not, then learn from it. How is it you made the wrong choice? How is it you misunderstood the possibilities? And then you don't make that again. So it's never a problem making a mistake. It's only a problem not learning from the mistakes that you make.
Well, it's like you say, taste the pudding. If the pudding's too salty, then redo it. If it's too sweet, redo it until you get that
Right.
perfect pudding.
Right. So you got to learn. You got to learn from your mistakes. Some people get so bound up with the idea that they don't know the perfect choice. They don't know the right choice, so they can't make any choice. So now they're stuck. You know, they can't do anything. So that is not helpful. Make the best choice you can, and it should be with a lot of thought, some meditation, you know, some intuition. Make your choice, and then see what happens. See how those chips fall, and learn. So there's no penalty if you say, well, I think this will be the low entropy, and it turns out unforeseen consequences. Oh, I created a mess there, and I really didn't mean to. Well, okay, that's not a big decrement for making the choice if you tried to make it for the right reasons, but learn from it. If you make that same choice again, the decrement will be a little bigger. And then if you make it a third time, it'll be even bigger. You know, you need to learn. So life is really
and it might be a
game.
good time for might be a good time for us to all start listening to the elders of our culture, because maybe we can learn from their experience. And I've sure enjoyed this conversation with you today, Tom. You know, it's just such a valuable voice, especially with what's going on in the world today.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, this has been like a visit with family. You know, it's you know, like I say, you know, you and I come from similar roots, right? We grew up at a time that was very expansive, and yeah.
We're going back there, though. I feel
yes,
it.
I think so too.
It.
We're coming up to a time that's going to be very expansive. I mean, I see good signs. I see signs of us growing up and learning. You know, just last year, this time, you know, we had COVID just getting started in China. And years before that, we've always had flus and other illnesses come around. Matter of fact, we had one back in the late 19, or what, before 1920, 1917, 18, 19, in that range, killed 20 million people at a minimum. I mean, really severe. And what did we do about it? Well, mostly nothing. You know, life went on as usual. Yeah, okay, that's life. People get sick, some of them die. You got to go on with life. That was the idea. And that's been the idea with every flu that's gone through here or every illness that's gone through until this past year. This past year, we got a flu and says, well, it's a little more contagious than usual, and it's a little more deadly than usual. And instead of us all shrug and say, yeah, well, you know, that's life. You know, stuff like that happens, and old people die, and it's just, you know, life goes on. You know, that's just the way nature is. People didn't say that. They said, hey, we can do something about it. We can wear masks. We can distance. Well, at least some of us did. You know, we can be part of the solution here, because they cared enough to want to do that. So I saw that as a good sign. People trying to help not spread the virus, because anybody who does math knows about exponential growth. And, you know, in a susceptible population, which we all are, because this is something new, that is an exponential thing. You know, it gets out of control very easily. And once it gets out of control, then services are swamped, and then a lot of people get hurt. So, hey, let's keep this thing under control. We'll weather it, but we'll weather it better if we all help. So I looked at that and said, hey, for the first time, people have decided to actually take action and be responsible for at least trying to slow this thing down. Now, how successful they're going to be, I don't know, but I think you can be pretty successful slowing it down. It may eventually run through and through and through till we all end up having it one way or another, but that's all right if that's slow. So I think that was a good thing. And like we said before, there's lots of people now who are pushing on kindness, caring. It's about other, you know, that I see that a lot. It's kind of a new thing. And yeah, I think maybe like back in the 70s, you know, when everything was opening up and consciousness was expanding, we don't have to just go to war because that's what the government says. You know, here's my draft card. You know, I don't want it anymore. I don't want to play that game because I think it's wrong. You know, well, that wasn't a possibility before, but in the 70s it was a possibility, a way to exert your own free will in the system, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So I'm seeing more and more and more of that now, and
then I see a time when we have the technologies, knowing that there is the consciousness concept can go beyond the physical, that we can literally extend that into our own bodies, see where we might have some sort of physical malady and repair them with our consciousness.
Oh, sure.
And have you ever, we're going to wrap it up because we're coming on 2 hours here. We want to respect your time, but have you ever had that kind of experience, Tom?
Oh yeah, you can heal all sorts of things with your mind. Mental healing is a very real thing. It's just a little more purposeful version of the placebo effect. You know, the placebo effect says get somebody to think positively about their illness and it'll help their illness go away. Well, instead of just thinking positively about it, you can actually focus your intent on accomplishing that, and it's a whole lot stronger than the placebo effect. Sure, that is the result of your intent modifies future probability. The future probability of being healthier rather than sicker, you can change that probability. And yes, I've done that a lot. You know, I've done that in some rather dramatic cases. It's again, it all works out of that intuitive side. You see, if you can get to that intuitive side, get your intellect to be quiet, because your intellect just wants to make a wish. Oh, I wish that person was healthier. That's what your logic is. That doesn't help. That doesn't work. You got to get rid of the noise. You got to get intuitive. It's got to come, some people would say, from the heart, but it has to come from the core of you. And it has to be focused, and it has to be clear, and it needs to happen in an intuitive space. And if it does, healing is one of the easiest things that we can do. Of all the paranormal things, healing is about the simplest. And that's because our ability to affect things depends on the natural uncertainty of what we're trying to affect. And because biology is so, we know so little about it. Doctors are guessing most of the time about what's wrong with somebody. We know so little about it that there's lots of uncertainty. I mean, thousands of people have been in stage 4 cancer, going to die in 3 months, and they don't have cancer anymore. And that was, 30 years ago. It happens. There's lots of uncertainty there. Where there's uncertainty, then you can use your intent to modify probability. It's easier, you see. Where there's very little uncertainty, well, it's very hard to modify intent with your probability. So it's not just get anything you want. You're manipulating probabilities with your intent. So healing is an easy thing to do. And one of the places that I'll tell you, I said I was going to give you some places for details. In my YouTube channel, which I guess is probably easy to find if you start with Google and go to me or My Big Toe or something like that, go to my YouTube channel and look for I think it was called an immersive that I did in TMI. That's the Monroe Institute. I just used their facility basically, and TMI supported it. I did it last year, and I think in maybe August. But look, just search the titles for TMI. You'll get several, and then take the latest one, which I think was last August. And in that immersive, I tell people how to communicate, how to get into point consciousness, how to heal, how to remote view, how to get data out of the databases. We go through all of these things, and I instruct them like things to do, things not to do, what gets in the way, what helps. Then they go try it. They go listen. I give them a binaural beat. That may be one of the things that Mike was talking about that helps you meditate without having to learn how. I give them a binaural beat because if they're not good meditators, that will tend to put them in a good meditation state and help them stay there. So it makes them a little better than they would be otherwise without it, which gives them a boost. But as I always tell them, it's just a tool. You got to learn to let the tool go. You need to do it on your own, but use it as you need it. So anyway, you could go there. The binaural beats are available at mbtevents.com. And they don't cost much. You get like 13 of them for $25 or something. They're pretty cheap. So you could listen to that. And when I say, okay, everybody go listen to listen to binaural beat 1, you can listen to it. Come back, you hear all the discussion about it, go back. You can take the whole course for free. I think the course cost about $2,500 to take it at TMI. And you can do really the whole thing free of charge just by going through it. The only difference that you won't have, that the people there had, is that you won't be able to ask your own personal question. But most people find their questions are answered because there's like 40 people, 50 people there. They're all having experiences. Some of them are old timers. Some of them are just new to this. There's all sorts, and they all have questions and they all ask them. So it's a high probability your questions will be answered by the questions that are asked by the group. So that would be the place to get the details if you really want to know how to do these things in detail. And it's pretty, well, the video is free on YouTube. If you're already a good meditator, you don't need the binaural beats. Leave those alone. You know, they're irrelevant to the process.
And we know binaural beats have been used, like we had Sherry Edwards on, to do healing and all sorts of things. There's a lot of different things you can use with that technology. So in the show notes, Tom, I will put down the links to your YouTube channel, your website, and all that, so people can find that easier. And I highly recommend reading Tom's trilogy. It's a fantastic read. You make it very easy for the layman to read. It's not like a thick scientific journal type read. It's a fun read that you designed in that way specifically. There's a lot of humor in it. There's some great stories from your life in it. It's a fantastic. I'm only read the first book, but so far I'm loving it. So great job on that. And I highly recommend it. It's actually in our book list. So if you go to alphavedic.com/book list, you can find it there, and it helps us out if you buy it through there, and it helps Tom out, of course. So please do that. And Tom, thank you so much for today. This has been a fantastic conversation. Any parting words to our community?
Well, parting words would be, love is the answer. It's all about growing up. That's the purpose that you're here. The science is nice, but that's not really the main thing. The main thing is you growing up, you making the right choices and making those right choices for the right reasons. That's what's important. And if you don't do anything else but that, that is your optimal contribution to saving not only yourself, but the world too. That's the idea. You know, we look at like the evil politician and the bad CEO and all these things, and we think if we could change them, that would fix things. Those are symptoms. Those are symptoms. They're not the problem. The problem is a low quality of consciousness. That's the problem. And we can only fix that in ourselves. You can't change anybody else. So if you want to make the optimal change to this world, if you want to make this world a kinder, gentler place, then your optimal contribution is to get rid of your own fear, get rid of your ego, get rid of your beliefs, become love. That's your optimal way for you to change the world. So you save yourself and the world all at the same time. And you're the only person that can do that. You're the only person that can change you. So, step up to that responsibility. So I guess that's the end thing, love is the answer. It's where we're going. Everything else is not as important as that.
I love it. Bear Lando.
Thank you, Tom. No, can't put anything any better, but just thanks again, Tom. And we hope to see you again someday there.
Yeah, well, it's been fun. Yes, sort of like hanging out on the back porch with family. It's
it is.
it's been a lot of fun.
Well, thanks again, Tom, and everybody for joining us. Thank you. Thanks for Cheryl Bailey, who's in our community, for connecting us with Tom's people. And Tom, we appreciate you. And we appreciate everybody in our community. And I hope you enjoyed this talk. If you did, please give us a like, a thumbs up, a subscribe, wherever you're listening or following this. Please share with your friends. This is important information to get out to people. It's self-empowering. It really is connecting to everything we talk about here, which is really doing the work yourself. And that's how, if you want to see the world change, look in the mirror. And also, it helps to get outside, get in nature, because nature shows us the way too. So get your feet in the sand and the grass, go grow something, go for a nature hike, and put down the devices here and there so you can have some silence and oneness and get out of your intellect a little bit. All these things we talk about all the time, Tom, in every one of our podcasts. So it all connects. So thank you guys. Love you. Have a beautiful day, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.